Our next speaker is Professor Unikrishnan from Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, Mumbai, India. And the topic is a new gravitational paradigm for relativity dynamics and the philosophical basis.
Friends, thank you all for a warm welcome to Finland. I'll be talking to you on a new gravitational paradigm for relativity dynamics and their philosophical basis. And I want to focus on empirical evidence which all of you can relate to and understand. And then as we progress, it will be clear why these empirical evidences demand a renewal, reassessment of the existing theories. Physics is our body of knowledge on matter, motion, and interactions. And this knowledge can be built up only by adding our understanding or internalizing to what we sense or perceive, the empirical data. Then we add postulates and hypotheses to the empirical data. Thus we build up the physical theory, which consists of both observations and unobservables. There are many unobservables in physics. Due to this structure of physical theories, this necessary structure of physical theories, they are susceptible to changes. Even a single crucial observation and new insight can sometimes overthrow a full physical theory, which we have been holding sacred probably for a century or more. So, let me present this in a particular way. Suppose we are told and shown that a fundamental theory we all believe in for more than a century is in fact in gross error and shown evidence for that fact. What will be our reaction? This will be probably more jolting and realizing several hundred years ago that the Earth was not at the center of the planetary system. What I mean is, see, everyone in this hall would have gone through various turmoils of a sociological nature or a personal nature, financial nature, and so on. But it's very unlikely that any of us here today has gone through intellectual turmoil of the kind faced by Galileo or Copernicus or those people in the dawn of the century dealing with the difficulties in relativity and so on, or even quantum mechanics. So I am talking about intellectual turmoil of that scale. Suppose you are shown empirical data which shows to you that the sacred theory, the theories we hold sacred for a century, they are in gross error. Suppose we are in a situation like that, what will be our reaction? How will we, are we willing to accept the new empirical data which will show that the theories are wrong? So what I want to present here is easily verifiable and understandable empirical data of measurements on time or electrodynamics and so on, and lead you through this new empirical evidence. So let me start with a very simple example. This is especially important for students here who are taught how clocks behave when they move in relativity. So we all know that clocks that move relatively ages more slowly, time dilation in special relativity. And special relativity has a very simple formula for time dilation. the clock which is moving, it has a time which is signified by the capital T. It depends on how much the clock moves through space, dx. So it is dt square minus dx square essentially. So all moving clocks should slow down according to our standard theory. So for example, if you have two clocks synchronized, one clock moves, comes back to the same clock, then you can compare these two clocks and you will see, you are supposed to see the clock that moved loses time, it ages more slowly. Okay, there is a formula which describes this phenomena. Of course, there is no reason why this happens. The reason is given as the clock moved, therefore it runs slowly. That's the only reason which is given. Now, let's take an actual example where two such clocks are synchronized, let's say in Bombay. And I move one clock a certain distance. And now at this stage, I cannot compare these two clocks because they are far away. To compare this clock, either I have to bring it back, or I can do one thing, I can move it along the same direction more, like that, keep moving, and finally the clock can come from the other side of the globe, and then I can compare this clock without retracing the path of this clock. So a clock has moved and come back to the old clock. And everybody who subscribe to the standard theory would say this clock should have time dilation. What is the actual fact? The clock which moved this way actually runs faster and not slower. This is evident in GPS every day. You may not be familiar with this result, but this is a fact. A clock which is transported westwards and continuously around the globe and brought back runs faster and not slower. This is the first evidence I wanted to present. So this formula is wrong. It is incorrect. It is proven as wrong every day in GPS related clock comparisons. Now let's go to another example. This is a beginning of Einstein's 1905 paper. He says it is known that Maxwell electrodynamics, as usually understood at the present time, leads to asymmetries which do not appear to be inherent in the phenomena. Take, for example, the reciprocal electrodynamic action of a magnet and a conductor depends only on the relative motion of the conductor and the magnet. And that is precisely why Einstein was looking for a theory in which relative velocities will appear. And the example which he was looking is the following. Take a magnet, put a conductor on top, on one of the poles, unipolar. Then you can move the conductor. Then a current will flow in this conductor. Or you can move the magnet instead of the conductor. And again, a current will flow in the conductor. And these two phenomena are physically equivalent in terms of actual empirical observation. And if you move the whole thing together like this, for example, you move the conductor, you get a current. You move the magnet, you get a current. Both can be described in terms of the Lorentz force, B cross B forces. And when you move the whole thing together, where there is no relative velocity, you don't get any current. And this is the basis of electrodynamics of moving bodies in special theory of relativity. That's the reason for the title of that paper. However, Einstein was not fully aware of the entire empirical situation. You can also do the following. You take a circular disk magnet and move a conductor like this. Of course, another possibility is you can move the magnet instead of the conductor. Or you can move the whole thing together. There is no relative motion. These experiments were done by Faraday in 1832, 1833 and followed up by Ampere. So, and this is described in his very charming Beckerian lectures, Experimental Researches in Electricity, second series. So when you move like this, there is a current in the conductor, exactly as when you move a conductor over a magnet, same thing. And you can describe this mathematically correctly. When you move the magnet, you may not be familiar with this result, there is no current. There is absolutely no current. It is not relative motion. This kind of experiments any laboratory can do, we do ourselves. Or you can move the whole thing together. There is no relative motion here. And this is where Faraday was really surprised. There is a current. This is the famous unipolar induction, which you don't even find in a textbook on electrodynamics these days. Okay? So, I'm just giving you different empirical observations already existing. This statement depends only on the relative motion of the conductor and the magnet in this paper is incorrect. He made that statement because he had only partial knowledge of the empirical evidence of the times. Now, when we go to the theory of relativity, it is described in empty space, what is called the Minkowski space. Absolutely empty space. And the absolutely empty space is homogeneous and isotropic. It looks isotropic and homogeneous anyway. Even when you move through empty space, it remains empty, it remains isotropic, remains homogeneous. And this is the reason for Lorentz transformation, because you start with empty space, homogeneous isotropic metric, Minkowski metric, and when you do Lorentz transformation, you get back the same metric. That's the logic of Lorentz transformation. However, what is the real world in which we live in? It is not empty. There is a lot of matter. For example, if you are in a moving frame, this is what we see, right? In a moving frame, we see a current of matter. Every moving frame has a current of matter, and space is anisotropic. Space might be homogeneous, but it's anisotropic. So, when you move through real universe, real space in which we live in, the space doesn't remain isotropic. It becomes anisotropic. And so I present this logical problem, which is very, very serious. All our fundamental theories, theory of relativity, theory of gravity, general relativity, theory of quantum mechanics, all these theories were completed well before we acquired any significant knowledge about the physical universe, its content, and its long-term evolution. We didn't know any cosmology by 1930. By 1930, we had completed all our fundamental theories. We follow the same fundamental theories 100 years after now. Those theories have not changed. But the new knowledge which came to us after 1930 is a new knowledge of cosmology. How much matter is there? What is the extent of our universe? All this is new knowledge. Imagine you make a theory of life, breathing, and so on, before somebody discovered the existence of oxygen. You will have probably a theory which works, but that theory will be factually incorrect because oxygen had not been discovered by the time you finish your theory. The discovery of oxygen comes later, which explains what is happening in terms of the chemical reaction and so on. Then you have to change your theory of breathing and life. If you don't change your old theory, which doesn't include oxygen, such a theory is bound to be incorrect. This is exactly what happens in the case of Orion. When I say exactly, analogously, the knowledge about the universe came later, much after you finish your theories. So therefore, your theory which doesn't include the matter and its gravity, your theory which claims that you live in an empty Minkowski space is bound to be wrong, logically speaking. But logic is not enough. I have to give empirical evidence because that is a decider of physics. So as I said, in particular, theories of relativity, dynamics, and all that were done before the universe, knowledge about the universe. In reality, space is not empty. It has matter and gravity, which is an important thing. It's not just matter. There is gravity everywhere at an average density, which we know about very precisely now. So all of physics and human activities are done in the enormous gravitational potential of the cosmic matter, whereas fundamental theories, as constructed, do not include these effects. Therefore, a major reconsideration, at least, is necessary, but nobody is doing that obvious reconsideration. So there is exactly one frame in which all the matter in the universe look essentially at rest. It's the same frame in which we see the cosmic microwave background isotropic and homogeneous. If you move in this universe, what you see is a moving galaxies, a current of matter, a current of charge of gravity, and you will also see the dipole anisotropy of the cosmic microwave background. You will not see an isotropic space. For people, especially students, I want to just indicate that it is a metric which changes into something. If it is Lorentz transformation, it remains, of course, invariant in Minkowski metric. But we know that space is anisotropic. It doesn't remain invariant. So Lorentz transformation must be inconsistent at some level. It cannot be the correct transformation. We live in what is called a Friedman-Robertson-Walker metric with space and matter. So why are we living in such logical poverty, blind to simple facts? Let's look at the actual metric. So, as I said, there is clear empirical evidence against the Lorentz transformation, at least the logical integrity of Lorentz transformation as a correct transformation. But we know that phenomena like time dilation are verified phenomena. Without Lorentz transformation, how can you get time dilation? You can ask me that question. And I am bound to answer this correctly. So I will show you what I call a simple and profound miracle. Because there is no other, since people have not noticed it before, there is no other way to describe it. So this is a metric which is standard Robertson-Walker metric. Since expansion of the universe is very, very slow, we can consider it approximately like a Minkowski metric. But when we move, I said there is anisotropy. So I do a Galilean transformation. It is not Lorentz transformation. Galilean transformation, x prime is equal to x minus vt and t prime is equal to t. What do I get? I get a new metric. This is what you get. Anybody can verify that. You see the miracle. I have done a Galilean transformation and I see the famous time dilation term 1 minus v square by c square coming out of a Galilean transformation. It has nothing to do with Lorentz transformation. And there is another term v dx by dx dt, which is an anisotropy term. Therefore, you immediately see that if you do a Galilean transformation in the real universe in which we live in, you automatically get time dilation and all the relativistic factors, 1 minus v square by c square, plus you also get the anisotropy which you see. So Galilean transformation is the right transformation, not Lorentz transformation as I have explicitly shown here. And the only thing I want to stress here is that once you say it is Galilean transformation, we have an absolute frame. We have absolute velocity. So the entire philosophical basis which was constructed after the special theory of relativity collapses. We get back absolute velocity and absolute time. So the real clocks, what we thought as a clock moving in empty space goes slow, is not the right situation. The actual situation is the clock is in the presence of all the matter in this universe. When a clock moves, it is moving in the presence of all the matter in this universe. When a clock moves, it is moving with gravitationally interacting with every galaxy in this universe. It is not moving in the empty space. And that is the reason for time dilation. And that depends on the absolute velocity, not on the relative velocity. Once you see that, you can easily explain why certain clocks go faster and certain clocks go slower when they are moved in the presence of this matter. I don't have time to go into details, but later anybody can discuss. I will show you the formula. Okay. Now, I want to spend a little bit of time. Suppose we want to calculate the gravitational potential in this room. How will we calculate? We will say Earth is there, Gm by R. I calculate the potential. But if I care to calculate the gravitational potential of the sun in this room, you will immediately say that it is larger than the gravitational potential generated by the Earth. The gravitational potential of the sun in this room is larger than the gravitational potential of the Earth. Force is larger, other way, but potential is larger. The gravitational potential due to galaxy is a million times 10 minus 6 relative to 10 minus 9 of Earth. So the trend is clear. Distant matter is more important for gravitational potential. So you can calculate the gravitational potential of all the matter in this universe. It is possible to do this calculation. Again, I'm not going through details. I want to stress that when you do this calculation, the gravitational potential of all the matter in the universe is numerically equal to square of the velocity of light. It's a very well-known fact. Therefore, what we thought in relativity as 1 minus v square by c square, the velocity of light, c square, it is not that, well, it has nothing to do with the velocity of light. It has to do with the gravitational potential of the universe. It is 1 minus v square divided by the potential of the universe. Relativity is controlled by cosmic gravity. This is a theory of cosmic relativity I have been talking about for some time. And I want to show you how much time, 10 minutes or something? 5 minutes, okay. So now I want to show you, I have been talking about what I think about relativity and so on. What I want to show you now is a fundamental question asked by Albert Einstein himself and answered, and which formed the core idea of special relativity and comparison of clock. The question is this: are two events A and B, which are simultaneous with reference to one reference frame, also simultaneous relative to another frame moving relatively? This is a very famous question which was answered by not only Einstein, before that Poincaré, Lorentz, and various people in different ways. So, let's look at an example. Let's look at an alarm clock where sound is a messenger of the event. So we know the velocity of sound is Galilean. It depends on the motion of the observer. Let's take that example. Sound emitted by the alarm clock moves forward independent of the velocity of the alarm clock. The velocity of sound does not depend on the velocity of the source. In fact, velocity of no wave depends on the velocity of source. But we know that velocity of sound depends on the velocity of the observer. It's Galilean. So even if the clock is moving, it's the same velocity. Now, let's try to answer Einstein's question, assuming that we are using sound as the messenger of the event, not light, sound, which is Galilean. The velocity depends on the velocity of the observer. Now, if the observer is right at the middle of two clocks like that, then two events will be simultaneous for the observer. The sound will reach simultaneously at the midpoint. However, if there is a moving observer on a boy on a bicycle, we know that in his frame, the sound velocity is more from one direction than the sound velocity from the other direction. The velocity of sound depends on the velocity of the motion. And therefore, the boy will listen to these two events not as simultaneous, but as succession, right? So, we have already answered the question asked by Einstein, if velocity of sound, velocity of the messenger is not an invariant, like sound. The answer is this following. Two distant events judged as simultaneous by one observer will be perceived as successive, not simultaneous, by another observer when the relative velocity of messenger wave is Galilean. Now, if the velocity of sound were constant, suppose it were constant, then of course our conclusion would change. Independent of the velocity of the observer, two events simultaneous to one would have been also simultaneous to another. Right? It's very obvious, very simple argument. So Einstein asked this question about light, not sound, when he assumed that the velocity of light is an invariant independent of the motion of the observer. So if he assumed that, his conclusion should have been just like velocity of sound being constant, one event, two events simultaneous to one observer is also simultaneous with respect to any other observer. That should have been his conclusion. However, you see, you can verify in Einstein's 1905 paper as well as his famous book on relativity, 1916, where he says, observers who take the railway train as a reference body must therefore come to the conclusion that lightning flash B took place earlier than the lightning flash A. Events which are simultaneous with reference to the embankment are not simultaneous with respect to the train and vice versa. So he arrived at the wrong conclusion after assuming that the velocity of light is a constant. He made a fundamental fatal error. And I was not the first one to point out this particular inconsistency. This was done by the very well-known philosopher Henry Bergson already in 1922 in his really beautiful book, Duration and Simultaneity, which I advise people to go and check and read. You can see during his 1922 visit to Paris, Bergson pointed this out. How did he point it out? Let me show that. Bergson says, after quoting Einstein's passage, he says, this passage enables us to cast on the wing an ambiguity that has been the cause of a good many misunderstandings. Let us emit two flashes of light. The point from which they set out no more belong to the ground than to the train. The waves advance independently of the motion of the source. It then becomes evident at once that the two systems are interchangeable. What is simultaneity with respect to the track is simultaneity with respect to the train. It's exactly opposite conclusion Einstein arrived at. Einstein made a fundamental error and special theory of relativity, not only because of this, because of all this independent empirical evidence I am presenting, is incorrect. Now, I want to just close with not with the details, because if there is some question, I will come back to it. Many people think that there is experimental proof for the invariance of the velocity. Typically, if you ask the question, what is the experimental proof that the velocity of light is an invariant? People will say Michelson-Morley experiment. No, Michelson-Morley experiment was done some 20 years before the postulate was advanced. The Michelson-Morley experiment is a two-way experiment. Light goes and comes back. So it doesn't measure really the one-way velocity of light. To really verify whether the velocity of light is an invariant, you need to measure the one-way velocity of light. And it's a very difficult problem because synchronization of clocks is involved. And synchronization of clocks are very, very difficult because you have to define simultaneity. And Einstein made the fundamental error in even defining simultaneity after assuming velocity of light is an invariant. So, on the whole, the result is the following. Let me show the result. because I should finish in time and then we can discuss something. I recently measured the velocity of sound as well as velocity of light using the same kind of experiment. That's two experiments in the same configuration. I measure velocity or one-way velocity, relative velocity of sound. There is another experiment of the same configuration where I measure the one-way relative velocity of light, so that I can compare the behavior of sound and light without depending on a theory. This is the result of the relative velocity of sound. As you expect, it is Galilean, c plus or minus v. The velocity depends on the velocity of the observer. Now I can do the same experiment with the light in the same configuration, and this is the result of light. Let me show a comparison. On the left, you have the relative velocity of sound being measured, and on the right, you have the relative velocity of light being measured. Both experiments are identical in configuration, and you can see both results are identical. Both of them depends on the frame. The true relative one-way velocity of light is Galilean, not invariant. So with this proof, we know that there has been urgent renewal, urgent reassessment of the theory. I will claim that we are in the same situation as Copernicus or Galileo and so on, where we should be intellectually very, very worried that we are holding fast to an incorrect theory of dynamics and relativity, which has been our theory for 100 years. It is nobody's fault, but we didn't have the advantage of the knowledge about the cosmology. And now we have that knowledge, and now if we are blind, we don't see this, then we are only to blame. We should think about it and change the theory. This is a time to renewal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.